Hello, everyone. This is Marilyn, CEO and founder of Cosmic Centaurs, and your host for the fourth annual edition of the Cosmic Conference, a 5-week hybrid conference all about helping you lead organizations that deliver, hosting our last session for the day. Over the last 5 weeks, we've been exploring the topic of organizations that deliver through 5 subthemes: strategy execution, scaling, transformation, capability development, and restructuring. We started on October 6th and we're wrapping up today. And over the last 5 weeks, I've been joined by incredible thought leaders, experts, and academics to share their insights, knowledge, and perspective. Today, our conference comes to an end. Those of you who tuned in are joining us for the closing discussion. But not to worry, if you missed any of our previous sessions, you can rewatch them on our website and on our YouTube channel. Now, throughout the past 5 weeks, all events, in person and virtual, have all been free to attend, and we're often asked why. The reason is that we measure our impact by how many people we help, not simply how much revenue we make. That's our real why. But a few months ago, someone asked us how they could thank us for this work, and so we had to think about it and come up with an answer. There are 2 ways that you can thank us if you've been part of one of our sessions and you've found value in it. The first is if you have a few dollars to spare this month, you can donate to the Cosmic Centaurs Fund, dedicated to supporting women re-enter the workforce. If you have 15 minutes to spare, instead, you can take our Future of Teams survey in partnership with Dr. Connie Hadley. Actually, a bit of flash news over here. This is the 3rd year in a row we run this survey, and we published a first version of our results and submitted them to a conference. And 2 days ago, we got accepted to go and publicly present the outcomes. So when you answer one of our survey, you are really contributing to science and to academic research. Both of those links will be dropped in the comments. Now, as always, before we begin, show us love, give this video a like, tag someone who you think might enjoy it. But of course, drop your thoughts and comments and questions in the chat, and Joe, our guest, and I will do our best to get to them before the session ends. Now, before I introduce, our guest for the day and our topic, I wanted to take this opportunity to just take a minute to reflect on the 2023 Cosmic Conference, all about leading organizations that deliver. We selected this theme because in our work, we hear leaders struggle not only with the development of strategy itself, but critically in its execution. And these leaders are not alone. 90% of companies fail to deliver on their strategies. That's a 1 in 10 success rate. It's almost worse than VC startups. If you think of how much time, money, effort, and energy goes into the strategy development process, especially in this region, it's not hard to see how much is at stake. So, as partners and consultants and somewhat of a geeky group, our first instinct is to call on the wisdom of academia and research to help us find out how to get strategy execution right. And one of the things that we found quite surprising as a, anecdote is if you go into HBR, the temple of modern management, and you type strategy execution, the first page includes BuzzFeed style listicles, like 5 simple rules for strategy execution. Now, already there, you're in trouble. And actually, what we found is that very few academics actually study this stuff. So we set out to design this conference as a platform that would allow us to look at the tenets of execution through the eyes of experts, leaders, and academics like today. Joe's joining us in just a few minutes. And in the last 5 weeks, we've hosted 12 virtual sessions, 4 in-person events, and 17 speakers joined us to share their perspective on these 5 topics. Every week, we had a different partner as well, and I'd like to take a minute to express my gratitude to each and every one of them. First of all, to Rami and the INSEAD UAE Alumni Association, thank you for offering community support for week 1. That was all about strategy execution. Thank you to Ronald, Lara, Maha, and Joe, and the team at Astrolabs, who co-hosted week 2 with us, all about scaling, including our first ever in-person event in Riyadh in their space. I'm grateful to Tim and Imad and everyone at the APCO Worldwide team and Gagan McDonald's, who co-hosted a leader circle in week 3 around transformation. Thank you to Abdurrahim and Jenny, our friends at Crayon, for animating week 4's leader circle about bridging capability gaps. And our partners from this week, Rabia and Alex from Tandem, who joined us on Wednesday for a webinar about how to lead through a restructuring. And last but not least, Thank you to my team. The Centaurs work super hard in the background to bring this conference to life. I always say I'm just the pretty face that, has the privilege to carry it forward, and I try not to mess up their very hard work, and they've done some incredible work this year. Now, before I introduce Joe, I just want to share maybe 3 or 4 things that we learned actually over the last 5 weeks that were surprising, now that I'm done with my Oscar-style acknowledgements. I think the first thing that resonated with me was that most people don't actually understand where strategy ends and execution begins. Now, later with Joe, we'll talk about the fact that this idea that there's a strategy process and an execution process isn't always, how it happens through time. But if we froze for a second the strategy process, and I think Mihai's talk at the beginning of the conference was really beautiful in terms of just understanding the technicality behind strategy, execution, and development and execution. But even then, I think a lot of people think that strategy development ends when you arrive at your first round of strategic choices. But there's more to this initial phase. It includes capability gap assessments, defining how to bridge those gaps, running feasibility and viability studies. All of that needs to happen before we validate a strategic choice. And it was so surprising to see how many companies don't actually go through the process. The second insight I want to share is around the central theme of leadership. And Joe and I will actually, towards the end of our session, talk about why does leadership exist at all? And why is it particularly important in the context of executing? Now, that has been a constant throughout this conference. Not only is there very little research on strategy execution, but if you do look at some of the research that is out there, like Kaplan and Norton, I think are the, best cited in this world. They delve deep into the challenges faced by organizations in the strategy execution piece, and their research led them to identify a process of strategy execution, but also 3 crucial enablers. The first is having a strategy execution management system like a SMO. The second is building a great technology infrastructure to support with data collection and information flow. But the third is leadership. And even for them, leadership is the wild card. It's the most challenging to figure out. It's why we call this conference and every session within it leading organizations that deliver. And it's more apparent to me than ever that this type of holistic leadership that understands the complexity of managing any organization through the strategy execution process is essential if you want to avoid being part of the 90% that don't deliver. And the final learning I want to share is around measurement. And I think it's a really great introduction to my discussion with Joe in just a few more seconds, which is one really interesting thing that we also explored through our many conversations is that companies aren't great at measuring the progress of a strategy. We set a strategy, we give ourselves a 3, 4, 5, 10-year timeline, depending on our strategic horizon. But we very quickly start measuring the success of the strategy by measuring the outputs of the strategy. But the strategy doesn't succeed in a linear manner. I always give the example of Adobe's digital transformation. They lost money and revenue and productivity for the first 2 or 3 years of that transformation. If they had been measuring the outcome, they probably would have stopped. And so, yes, there is the balance scorecard that kind of helps to set KPIs that measure progress towards strategy. But the revelation is really around how leaders understand their role of leading through time and how they can understand the ongoing emerging process that is required for strategy execution and how to measure the success. So that's where I introduce my guest, Joe. Welcome to the show today. Thank you again for joining us. It's become a yearly tradition now to have you be our closing speaker for the 4th year in a row. So I'm always very excited, and I know that our audience waits for these conversations because they're always full of a lot of wisdom as we come to a close. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you.
I'll introduce you really quickly, although I'm sure that for a lot of people joining us, you need no introduction. But Joe is an affiliated professor of practice in global management. He spent 20 years in the managerial world and then moved from Italy to INSEAD and devoted himself to scholarly work, a dream from his youth. Joe's research and teaching focuses on the management of multinational enterprise, particularly that of global integration and global innovation. Today, Joe and I will be discussing the topic of leading through time. So you can drop your questions or comments in the chat box, and we'll try and make sure to get to them. Let's begin. Ready, player?
Absolutely. Let's begin. It's always wonderful to have a conversation with you. And I know, of course, that the conversation with you, as you say, is part of a conversation with your team, because it is you and your team that make all these things possible. I was so pleased to see the title of this conference this year, this idea of delivery, that organizations deliver. And it's actually a very interesting and not very common way of describing what organizations do, because one could even say that an organization exists insofar as it delivers. If it actually doesn't deliver, we can't be sure it exists. It could just be a bunch of people that have no clue what they're doing and just happen to be, for example, in the same place for apparently no reason whatsoever. And so delivery is a very interesting expression. I know, of course, that you were an exemplary student at INSEAD, one of my best students ever. And so I'm very happy that you and your team give so much relevance to research that is performed by academics. That's point number one. I think we need a lot of that. And the other thing which I think is quite important is the rigor that you use when you speak, for example, because that's another one of the difficulties that exists in the managerial world, is this willingness to use metaphors and language that confuses more sometimes than it illuminates. So it's always a pleasure for me so far every year to be part of this, of your conference, which is quite unique. It's remarkable to deliver a conference over 5 weeks, speaking about through time, and in a way to use time as a metaphor of space. Although this year you started to combine space and time, which is also very interesting and quite novel. Who knows? Perhaps that will be the way we will work several years from now. And the interesting thing, we'll talk about that, is that we can't know if it will be that way or another way. And that's the whole fun of it. The reason why we're here, the reason why leadership exists, and we'll come to that, I hope, is because things happen through time. If time was not there, leadership would actually not be needed. But we'll go back to that. So yes, I'm delighted to be here. I'm glad that I can speak with your followers and your public. It's just great. It's a pleasure to have a conversation. No,
likewise, and also
no, I mean, just an interaction between humans, which, by the way, is what really makes us human. But we'll leave that for another year when probably artificial intelligence will be
at the center of the discussion. Yes, absolutely.
And we'll talk about what is truly human, and surely doing this is human. Anyway, go ahead.
All right. Well, one of the things that I also really enjoy is the preparation, like the process of preparing, because you and I speak for many hours before we get to this session. And I think one of the first things that we observed, even, a month and a half ago when we started talking about this, and that we had like our first discussion about, was about the fact that, can you really have a process for strategy execution? How do you think about that? And how, when we try to represent the process of strategy execution, we are excluding a lot of dimensions. We are trying to put order in what can be a very disordered situation. And we're trying to, engineer something where we can only really engineer a portion of it. And how do we then represent other dimensions that come into play? The political nature, for example, of the strategy process. And I think that you shared a really interesting way of not only adding the dimension of time, but also beyond the process itself, linking the concept of culture, of politics, of rationality into this. Talk to us through that. How do we layer these things on top of this engineered process?
Well, well, first of all, it's important to consider that strategy is not a formula. It's not a plan. It may be formulated, it may be written down in a document, but it's not the document itself or the formula that is the strategy. It's just a representation of the strategy. And we owe that, for example, or that clear consideration to Henry Mintzberg, that published a very important piece in the 80s, in 1985, in the Strategic Management Journal, in a way saying that a company may have a strategy without having a plan, without having a formula, because you can observe strategy in the pattern of the organization's delivery, if you will, or in their behavior as a company, as a collective of people. And so you don't need to see, let me use a very common example that everybody will understand. You don't need to know that McDonald's has a strategy, because if you go to 2 or 3 or 4 of their restaurants and you see what happens in the restaurants, you say, wow, there's a pattern here. And if there is a pattern here, by the way, in this case, through space, but also through time, because if you go there 6 months later, it's basically the same thing, perhaps with something new or something dropped off the menu, but that's a detail. You say, wow, there is a strategy here. There is a pattern here. It's a pattern in what they offer to us, in a way, the demand side of the market. It's a pattern in how they compete with other restaurants or substitutes of restaurants that we may go to. So that's the first thing. You can have actually many small firms, many startups don't have a plan. Well, nowadays, sometimes investors force them to have a business case, but we can go to that. But often the business case is written to get the money more than to really, well, let's not go there for the time being. So that's the first point. So, and it's an important point, because often the strategy is revealed through the quote unquote execution. It's the delivery that displays the strategy. So it's something that actually happens. The performance of companies, the performance of organizations is what happens in space and time, not just what's written. So that's point number one. But there's another point which is very, very, I think, relevant for us, which is, for example, at heart, the strategy process is a political process. It's not an economically rational process, although many would like to think like that, in particular those that come from the dominant view of economics, from neoclassic economics. But it's not, it's actually political. Whoever has been in a company, and in particular in a reasonably large company, but also in a relatively small company, knows that if you are formulating a strategy, if you are in the process of doing that, all sorts of influence come to play, and department managers try to get as many resources as they can for their departments. Other units say, look, we're so good, give us, we need people, we need money. And others say, no, sell them, we're great. But I'm simplifying, caricaturing, but it is a political process. And so if we don't take into account that strategizing is a political process, and actually even execution is a political process, because during execution, managers, and not just managers, owners, directors are trying to influence what's going on according to their own views or their own interests. So even from the outside, the unions, the regulators are trying to shape using, well, power. And we need to take into account power. The more our societies are culturally hierarchical, which is the case of my own original people. I'm Portuguese. and in most of the national cultures in the Middle East, for example. So when we are in hierarchical cultures, we need to be even more aware of the political nature of process. But it's also a cultural process, of course. It's deeply embedded in beliefs and values that we hold as culture, meaning that we are actually not aware that we bring with ourselves. Otherwise, it's not culture. And of course, yes, and there is a rationality in the process. We want to achieve, for example, a better return on investment, or a better satisfaction for the employees, or attract people, or whatever it is. Then there is a rationality in the traditional sense. So strategy making, like so many interventions by managers, have these three facets. There's a cultural facet, which is very hard to see. There's a political facet, which is, if you observe, more visible. And then this rational, economically rational, financially rational dimension, which is the easy one to see. It's so easy to observe, even from the outside. So it's very important to get, of course, the economics of something right. We're talking about companies mostly as economic institutions. Even if they're not for profit, they're still economic. They're using resources, which are not unlimited, as we now know, to produce other things that are resources for others. So this is truly an economic process, an economic institution that was created over time to address certain recurring problems that human beings face as society. So that's a very important thing. But they're the things that you can actually learn by studying. You can learn with books, you can learn at school. So that more observable, rational, what you call engineering kind of approach, we can learn at school. And I'm so glad that more and more and more people go to school to become eventually a professional manager. Sorry, let me correct this. A manager. Management is not a profession. It will probably never be a profession. And I'll finish now, because we are, as humans, we are social beings, meaning we act together. And whenever the need is hard, whenever something is dire, we really act together. And so since we were born, even, I'm not speaking about the species, but I think about ourselves, since we are little kids, in the cultures that we grow, that nurture us, we learn how to play together, how to kind of work together. And we develop the qualities that are needed in the fundamentals of management since we are born. So anyone can be a manager. Actually, we know this. Anyone can be a manager. And of course, sometimes people get convinced that they can be an effective manager without studying, without preparing themselves, without looking into economics, without looking into marketing. And these things you can learn not only in a school. Now you can use the internet as a fundamental source to learn certain things. You can. So it's not acceptable anymore that investors or owners or top managers or managers don't know these fundamental things that are the observable part, the rational part, the engineering side of strategizing and quote unquote execution, if we want to use those concepts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that that's also, this really echoes what I had said in my opening keynote about the fact that we can, this engineering process, this rational process, that we have plenty of content towards. And precisely because it is observable after the fact, right? So as an academic, I'm sure you can attest that you need a lot of case studies and stories. You need to go inside organizations to truly understand them, to extract learnings that you can then share that are demonstratable and meaningful. And with the rational side of strategy, that can be observed even 400 years later. No one even still has to be alive for you to be able to know whether a strategy was successful and why. You just need some records. But when it comes to the culture and politics dimensions, I think these need to be directly observable. And something that you said to me in one of our chats leading up to this was that when you're having a discussion about strategy or strategy execution, the person in front of you may be more able to resonate with the culture or the politics or the rationality facet of the discussion. And that it's important to know how to position that, because we try and make strategy a temple of rationality. Like, at least that's kind of the common myth or the common fallacy, that strategy is rational, when it's not necessarily the case. And earlier, when you were talking about if you've been in large organizations, you know that it's not rational. I was, both rethinking of my own experience in large corporates, be it as an employee or as a consultant or a partner, and truly thinking the times where I've said to myself, this doesn't make any sense at all. But it's just because one person with more access to power, resources, more influence, sees this direction as being more relevant. It made no rational sense to anybody else, but the politics and culture came into play to make that the strategy, even if it wasn't rationally the right way to go forward.
Yes, absolutely. And by the way, I'm not implying, and I don't want to imply, that individuals in companies or in organizations do this with guile or because of greed or something. That's a different matter. They may, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking what is amazing to me, what is fascinating to me, both when I was a manager and in the last 2 decades or so, when I returned to my academic life, is how great people, subjectively speaking, can be together and act in a way that after the fact is so odd. And that's in a way, that's the fascinating part, at least to me, Of course, if people with ill intents get together and do things, and I'm not interested in that. That's for another, at least it doesn't fascinate me. I'm much more interested in saying remarkable individuals get together and do this. Wow, I don't even want to say the word, and say, how can this happen? And the beauty is that they were not irrational often. They just didn't understand the whole. They did not understand that they were part of a system, of a whole, of a collective action. And to understand that collective action is actually quite difficult, because most of it is not observable. Like, for example, the cultural dimension is really not observable. Or if it is, it's not culture. So you see, the work of companies like Cosmic Centaurs, for example, you and your team have a very, very hard task, because when you work with a company, you try to understand the things which are not easy to observe, and that often the people inside the company does not observe. And because sometimes that's what happens. And this is, of course, much harder. It requires actually a lot of leadership qualities. When you come with formulae, when you come with charts, when you come with data, and you say, look, this is the market, and this is not your understanding of the market, and this is the value, the use value of your products, and this is the use value of your competitor products, and oh, of course. But that's not what matters in the end. What matters in the end is the interaction between the environment that surrounds the company, the strategy of the company, and the organization that makes up the company. The people that together try to deliver something that in a way will be typified as a strategy in a particular environment. So let's not forget, there are 3 fundamental elements that determine performance: the environment around the company, or context, if you will, the strategy, what the company does, or the pattern of what the company delivers, and the organization, the set of people. What is harder for a manager and a leader? Oh, the relationship, the interaction between these three elements. It's not one, it's not designing one, getting one right, and then say, well, the other ones will be aligned. No, there is no alignment. That's the point. That's why time matters. There is no alignment. There cannot be alignment because we don't know the future. And so time matters because time reveals to ourselves our inability as humans to know the future. And therefore we need to bring more into the discussion the matter of uncertainty. And I hope we can discuss uncertainty a little bit, because again, the dominant view of economics, the dominant view of management does not consider uncertainty to exist. Or rather, the word uncertainty is used in a very ambiguous way to actually mean risk. And we need to distinguish the two. That's when time is needed if we want to think of this.
Yeah, when you and I were talking about this, first I thought it was great to make a distinction between risk and uncertainty, because we tend to use these words interchangeably, but they don't mean the same thing. And then because the strategy, delivery, execution, we'll talk about delivery versus execution later, but because getting the strategy done, quote unquote, is the process that happens through time, it is also where we start to see this lack of alignment, this non-linearity, the fact that we're dealing with a system, not a process, that things influence each other, and a change here leads to a change there, and we can't just oversimplify things. Otherwise, we cannot lead an organization when we oversimplify things. So maybe start us off with a quick, what's the difference between risk and uncertainty? And then let's talk about how time reveals uncertainty and why it's such an essential dimension for leaders to truly kind of grasp and understand as they're delivering on their strategy.
Sure, with great pleasure. So in a way, we owe the clarity of the distinction to two economists that wrote around 100 years ago, actually both in 1921, which interestingly, 1921 is after the so-called first pandemic of the 20th century, first and only, the so-called Spanish flu, and after the First World War. So it's for me, it's actually amazing that the first two economists that knowingly, explicitly wrote about uncertainty being different from risk, wrote it in 1921, which is basically 100 years ago. One was Frank Knight, an American economist, and the other one is John Maynard Keynes, a British economist, which is much better known because of his own work. Knight was writing about entrepreneurs, and he basically said, profit, or if you will, the prize of being an entrepreneur is that you cope with uncertainty, not risk. If there is risk, buy an insurance policy. There's nothing special about that. And in a way, that's the fact. So for Knight, but also for Keynes was even a bit harder, as it were. The idea is this one. We may be able to know that the future will have this outcome or this outcome or this outcome. And the first one with 20% probability, and the second one with 30% probability, and the third one with 50% probability. And that's, for Knight and for many, a situation of risk. So we know that the future may be, scenario planning, for example, is a technique that is really based on that and so forth. So we don't really know the future, but it'll be A, B, or C, and we can attach probabilities. And then even what Savage called subjective probabilities. So we don't actually need a past empirical base to have objective probabilities. We can use our intuition, our feeling, our experience to attribute subjective probabilities to these quote unquote scenarios or outcomes. And therefore, And then we manage, or we decide what to do based on the expected outcome. And here we bring, and that's the dominant model. That's what MBAs learn. That's what investors use, and so forth. So that's the approach. Risk. Uncertainty is different, and uncertainty can either be seen as you may know that the future is A, B, or C, but you have no clue of what are the probabilities of A, B, or C. Keynes went further and he said about the future, and he has this very interesting expression, we simply don't know, period. In a more sort of perhaps rigorous manner, he said, there is no scientifically viable or valid way of knowing the future. And that is what uncertainty is. And so sometimes we refer to it as Knightian uncertainty or Keynesian uncertainty or just fundamental uncertainty or radical uncertainty or objective uncertainty, just to make the point that it's not the common, often we use the word uncertain as if we were talking about, well, tomorrow it will either rain or not rain, and it's half-half, so it's uncertain. Well, yes, but no, it's a risk. So if you go to the beach, you may find yourself in the middle of a storm with rain and so forth. So that's the risk. There's actually no uncertainty. Again, you can.
Yeah, I feel like we use uncertain when we mean unsure.
Well, actually, we should, in a way, uncertainty means unknowable. You can't not know now. You can only know then, and that's why time comes into play. And the question is, what do you do when you find out? And what is finding out? What you don't expect to happen? Well, that's a surprise. So if you want to lead through time, you need to focus much more on what surprises you than in what confirms or disconfirms what you were expecting. So instead of doing, well, let's do a quarterly review, see where we got in our KPIs, see the differences, understand why the differences occur, and take corrective measures. I said, no. That may be okay if the world was, stable, in equilibrium, that would be wonderful. But the world is neither stable nor in equilibrium. The world is always very far from equilibrium. And now, believe you me, much more than usual. And so you cannot know. So focus on what surprises you. And it's in what surprises you really that you will, in a way, find the solution to uncertainty. This revelation through time is what tells us what we could not know before. I actually go further. I think that uncertainty in a world like ours, like the global world that exists today, the post-pandemic world that we live in, is so complex that the future is not just unknowable, it is unimaginable. And therefore, the question is, how can we manage? How can we lead others if we really don't know the future? And here, I just want to make another distinction, which is pretty important. There is a reason why sometimes we refer to uncertainty as objective relative to subjective. And if we want to be a bit more erudite, it impresses people in the cafe, for example, you can say ontological or epistemological. So what is the difference? I may not know the future because I don't know, but others do. And that's called subjective uncertainty. We're not talking about that. So if you don't know the future, but others may, well, hire them or talk with them or observe them, what they do. It's very important, what we call vicarious learning or vicarious learning. So observe what they do, talk to them, study them, acquire their services if they are consultants or advisors. Fine. So that's not the uncertainty we're talking about. The uncertainty we're talking about is objective in the sense that I don't know the future, you don't know the future, and no one knows the future. And that's the circumstance in which we are today. in the world. Perhaps in some industries more than in others, of course. In some places of the world more than in others, of course. But given the global nature of our world today, the world is global, and that's it. There's nothing we can do about that. By the way, the world was always global. We just found out recently. But because it is global, even uncertainty that may be, quote unquote, a bit more complicated to understand or even to fathom in a particular part of the world will impact our part of the world. Nowadays, instantaneously or almost instantaneously. And again, in some of the conflicts that now exist in our world, we all know that. And the pandemic again shows, if we needed proof, that we have a global world, that we're all together, that there's nothing we can do about that. The pandemic is a display of that global nature of the world. In the particular case, the finding of the solutions was also a display of how global our world is, with the vaccines being a collaboration of people dispersed around the world, mostly scientists, of course, but that's not the point. Is that it was a global program that came out to the solutions that we have used to at least turn the pandemic into something that we now call endemic, but it's still with us. But the point is, in a post-radical crisis world like we are today, we even cannot imagine the world of the future. And imagination is a wonderful thing, which any leader will need. But we need to be so realistic in a way and say, how can we manage, how can we guide collective action if we really don't know the future? How can we do that? And that's the essence of managing or leading through time.
And we talked about the fact that, so, as you were just saying now, we're at a moment where this idea of equilibrium is so distant. We are not anywhere near an equilibrium. Maybe if we're lucky, we're somewhere between two equilibriums, and the world doesn't stay like this for too long. I don't know if we'd all be very good at managing it forever. But one of the things that we don't find is that there's no good theory about how we manage in between two equilibriums, right? Like when we discuss economic theory and so on, we look at different equilibrium states, but there's no real. And I came to you on like Joe Shirley, because I'm like, maybe I'm just really crap at research, and surely you could point me in a direction that teaches leaders, managers, owners, whatever we want to call them, entrepreneurs, some, good practice or some right way to approach leading in between two moments of equilibrium. And you said, actually, Marilyn, no, there isn't anything. Why is that?
Well, two things. Quite a challenging question. So first thing, because the dominant view in management, which as a field started again about 100 years ago, surprise, surprise, the first texts of what we could call management were all written by engineers. I'm not joking. Oh, by the way, my first degree is in engineering, so I kind of know what I'm talking about. But not that I ever practiced engineering, apart from a few months just to know what it was. But yes, that is true. Fayol, for example, was an engineer. Of course, Taylor was an engineer. And even the first paper that one can consider a paper in management is a paper that was presented in a conference in the US in the late 19th century by an engineer talking about costs in factories. So you see, engineers dominated, in a way, the first approach in what we call management. But interestingly, then they were kind of overtaken by economists. So this is economists 1, engineers 0, if we want to talk in terms of a soccer match. And economics took over. Now, and the dominant view of economics, neoclassic economics, which is pretty amazing, is a view that, again, does not consider uncertainty as existing, and assumes that there is an equilibrium. And yes, then with Schumpeter a bit later, we speak about, or economists speak of, creative destruction. And it's actually very interesting to get these two words together, creative destruction. And by the way, of course, creative is before destruction because this is English. If it was, say, French, it would be destruction that is creative. So we would have destruction, which makes a bit more sense. But let's forget that linguistic discussion for a moment. So what is creative discussion? It's actually two verbs. Creative destruction is two verbs, to create and to destroy. So the first thing is that you destroy an equilibrium. That's what entrepreneurs do. That's what Steve Jobs, Ingvar Kamprad, Musk, all great entrepreneurs do that. And even in Dubai or in many parts of the Middle East, you find great entrepreneurs that have, in a way, destroyed the existing equilibrium or existing order, if you will. And then there is the creation of a new equilibrium, hopefully superior. I mean, the idea rationally is that it is superior. It's better. So, and then what nobody discusses, because by the way, time does not exist in neoclassic economics, how does we go from one to the other? So what happens during the destruction and what happens during the creation? And by the way, what happens in between? Well, and if you get out of this paradigm, if you get out of the neoclassic paradigm and you go into complexity economics, staying with economics, which came to light in actually about 15 years ago or so. One of the first works on that is by Brian Arthur of the Santa Fe Institute. And so what is this idea of complexity economics is that, first of all, there is no equilibrium. We're always far from equilibrium. And second, if you even consider something to be stable enough to call it an equilibrium, then what is relevant is not the equilibrium, the old and the new. What is relevant is the process of going from one to the other. That is what matters. And that is called emergence. And if we devote a little bit of time to discussing this, what is emergence? So, which is not the same thing as creation. And by the way, we speak about emerging markets, emerging technologies. Take, for example, AI. AI is an emerging technology. Even digital technology as a whole is still an emerging technology, the same way that the steam engine was an emerging technology, and the internet was an emerging technology. By the way, that no one predicted. It happened. So we can go then to discussion about black swans and how do they come about? Well, they come about in time or through time because we can't predict them, meaning they're again another display of our inability to know the future. So let's focus our discussion, at least our attention in not what was the old order and what will be the new order, or equilibrium if we speak in terms of economics, or strategy if we speak in terms of a company. What was the old strategy and the new strategy? What were we delivering before and what are we delivering now? And the important thing is that what we are delivering now and tomorrow is not the outcome of a plan, but it's always the outcome of emergence. Now, it's guided by a plan. The operations, the delivery in a large company must be guided by a plan. So let's not confuse strategic planning with multi-year operational planning. Multi-year operational planning, or multi-months, or whatever you want to call it. So planning operations through time is a necessity, in particular in large organizations, diversified companies, multinational companies, multi-establishment firms, even within a country. It is absolutely necessary to have multi-period operational plans. Yes, but they are not strategic plans. So let's not call them strategic plans.
Yeah, that's a bad etymology problem right there. Just on that topic of the creative destruction, you're just making me think. It's completely left field over here, but you're making me think of, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Nataraja. It's a depiction, if you will, of the god Shiva as the cosmic dancer. And the belief is that the cosmic dancer, every few cycles, if you want to go into the spiritual side, I think it's a great, sometimes what you won't find in economy, you might find in spirituality. Although I'm not usually the one to bring up these kinds of examples, but I actually have a statue of the Nataraja sitting here in my room. And he is described as the cosmic dancer, and his dance is one of creation and destruction, and comes about every few cycles. And the belief is that it's there to free men from the illusions that they are, prisoners to bring them back to reality, actually, every few cycles. So I think that even though you were not thinking that I would ever bring something like that up in one of our discussions, I like to connect, different realms. And I thought when you were talking, I couldn't stop thinking about the Nataraja and how, in fact, the cosmic dancer always comes back to create the disequilibrium, which allows us to create, hopefully, a better equilibrium at the end of it. But I think you were also leading us to a discussion, which is, to go from one place to the next, to go from an equilibrium to another, we have to transform, right? We have to change. And in fact, one of the questions that we wanted to talk about today is, why do we need to transform at all?
Yes. Sorry, would you mind if I go back? Because a moment ago you said
absolutely.
To handle this uncertainty or to cope with uncertainty. By the way, you cannot manage uncertainty. You can absolutely manage risk. And there's today a lot of knowledge about that. It's not my field, but it's a great thing to explore and learn from. But you cannot manage uncertainty. You can cope with uncertainty. And you said, are there ways to cope with uncertainty? Yes. One of them, of course, is to use imagination to the degree that is possible. And what you were doing, the connection that you were doing, bringing your understanding of some mystical world into our discussion, is exactly you're using your imagination. So one of the things is we need to use more our imagination than we use our knowledge in periods of emergence. The other thing that we need to observe is to observe companies that have, quote unquote, changed the world. Not that every company will change the world, but some companies do actually shape their markets as opposed to adapt to the market. By the way, the dominant view is that what you do is adapt to the market. You study the market, you find some sort of thing that is missing, then you have a strategy to fill that gap in the market, and then you do it. Yes, that's called adaptation. Wonderful. But Apple didn't adapt. Tesla is not adapting. IKEA did not adapt, and so on and so forth. By the way, Dubai did not adapt to its environment, believe you me. Just to give an example of this can happen in different levels in different ways. So when there is collective action intended to shape the environment, and by the way, that is possible during periods of emergence. It is not possible during periods of stability. Absolutely not. When that is possible, that's when you need leadership, true leadership, which is individuals that are capable, often by using their own imagination, to see, quote unquote, an image. By the way, it's so interesting that people speak about vision and then forget that a vision means an image. Inside of us, which is quite a remarkable ability of humans, we can imagine. Imagine comes, of course, from image. It was very important in the Middle Age. Everything was images then, instead of being formulae. So perhaps instead of saying strategy formulation, we could say strategy imagination. So, and that's why we speak of visions. But so if there's someone with a vision of something that may be, although it's not yet, and leads a group of people that feel comfortable in being led because the leader absorbs the uncertainty around the world. We humans do, I think that the image that you brought with the mystical world is wonderful. It's actually quite remarkable. But we human beings perhaps don't like that because of that implies. We want to be in a world without uncertainty in a way. We want to kind of know the future, and we have many cultural ways to address that. Some people believe they control the future, and other people believe that, well, someone is controlling the future, and we just need to follow. But that's the point being, we as leaders, or those that lead others, need to have some vision, some imagination about what can be the future, and be able to use their own energy to absorb the uncertainty around the organization, so that people inside the organization don't have to worry about tomorrow. When I go into a company, one of the first things I do is that I talk to people, workers, managers, sometimes even suppliers that are waiting for payment and things like that. And when I see that people are worried with tomorrow, if they say, well, I'm not sure if I have a job tomorrow, I say, poor leadership. Leadership is not about inspiring others. Great people are inspired by themselves intrinsically. If you actually need to inspire managers, there's something wrong with the process of selecting managers. But yes, we need to be able to, coping with uncertainty means that we can absorb uncertainty, and the people that follow us exactly because of that, because they somehow believe that if they follow us, they can build something better. They can create something better. And that's the quality that we need to develop more and more and more. Now, do we need to transform? Yes. Yes. Why? Because the world is always in transformation. Now, we can have a very interesting conversation about this, but suffice to say that we know, at least those of us that have studied physics or thermodynamics, and now, of course, we know that that's a much more general feature of our world, is this idea that entropy grows over time. Again, over time, meaning disorder grows. We get older, by the way, small detail. And of course, as we get older, our energy is not the same. What we can do is not the same. And there's nothing we can do about that. But when we act together in some sort of collective action, with people from different peoples, with people from different generations, with people from different walks of life, that together can solve things that we as individuals cannot. That's the whole point of being together and sharing bread. And I always remember having a journey together with others and sharing the bread, the resources we have, is in Latin kun pane, and kun pane is company. So a company is, of course, those that share bread while walking through a journey, a hard journey often. And that's why I often like to use the word company, because an organization is a company. And if it achieves the major purpose is to do things that humans cannot do alone, cannot do on their own. And one of the things we cannot do alone is to face, or rather cope with, uncertainty. We become anxious, anguished. And in a way, it is now easier for me sometimes to teach this when I teach, because people now have all experienced the pandemic. And if you remember the first weeks of the pandemic, we immediately went to the cave, which is now called our homes, and we closed ourselves. And gladly, we had this technology that allows us to, by the way, have you noticed that the emergence of working remotely was actually an emergence? There were no plans for us to do it. Most companies had never thought about it. But the fact is that a few weeks later, we were most of us doing it. That's what an emergence is. Now, it was a temporary thing because it was a radical crisis. And crisis, by the way, in Greek, I'm told, also means dividing, also means something that is destroyed, but then rebuilt. The idea that there is a destruction and then an opportunity. Yes, that's basically the same thing. But the opportunity, the post-crisis, takes time, 5, 10, 15 years. Great companies like Apple or Tesla or IKEA or Dubai as a collective take time to be what they are. There was no plan for Apple to have the iPhone at all. But iPhone will probably be the thing that will have Apple in history books. There was no plan for it. There was no vision of it. But again, the so-called IKEA concept, there was no plan for it. It took 25 years for the IKEA concept to shape. It took many years for the Apple concept to shape. It's taking many years for the so-called Tesla concept to shape. So these strategies are being shaped as they are delivered. And that's what we need to see. We need to understand this, to observe this interaction between what we intend and what happens. And it is this interaction over time that we can find the solution. Do we need to transform? Absolutely, because we are humans and we actually shape our environment. And the first way we did it was agriculture. But when you get to a place, you see, oh, there were humans here because they changed the environment. We change our environment. That's being human. Now, we may also destroy it, and we're trying our best not to. But that's not the point. The point is that we need transformation. And so we need to think more about how can we shape the market, then how can we adapt to the market. And shaping the market has this element of uncertainty.
I have so many things I have to repeat after you said them because they're just so beautiful.
Well, thank you.
And if I was, I've always been an etymology geek, but every time I talk to you, I'm convinced of why. First of all, you have never shared, I don't know why I didn't think about it, but we've never spoken about company, like that kind of the bread sharing, the collective, the companionship. Also, like you were saying, and I was like, Marilyn, how stupid. How have you never associated the word company with companionship? It's so obvious, and yet sometimes it's the obvious that isn't visible to us. So that is beautiful. And the other, which you had shared with me once before, but I just want to repeat it in case anybody in our audience missed it, because it was in between 5 other insights, is this culture piece that comes from our relationship to our environment and our land, and how we both respond to it and shape it through our will and our energy. I think those, you said a lot of amazing things in the middle, but to me, when in your classes, you used to ask us at the beginning of every class, like, what is one thing you want to remember in 20 years? And I think it's because one of your teachers at LBS used to do that with you.
Yeah,
and this is something I want to remember in 20 years. Every so often you come up with something like that, and I'm like, wow. And you might have noticed, I know you rewatched the session with Rabia and Alex, and I was like, Joe always says that being a great leader is about managing uncertainty, because we were talking about restructuring. So I think there are these things, and your definition of leadership is truly beautiful. And you had shared with me that leadership became a fashion at the same time as uncertainty started to grow, and that you had a discussion with somebody about the difference between management and leadership that led you to kind of gain that kind of deeper understanding. You can manage what you can manage risk, all of those things that you've told us over the last hour. But leadership is about coping with uncertainty, reducing anxiety, and creating a space for those around you to be able to create and imagine. I think that's such a wonderful lesson about what leadership means.
Thank you. It came from our interaction.
Yeah, I think that's also echoed by our audience. Love the comment around imagination. It's beautiful. Someone asked, how can leaders inspire those around them to balance between the aspiration to imagine and the sense of realism. I wonder, I think you've already answered it in some ways by explaining the role of leadership, but do you have any, advice on how to be that kind of leader, essentially?
Well, it's a I wish I knew kind of question. But perhaps one thing that we all can do, is to observe those that we followed and to reflect on why did we follow them? Because at every point of our life, we were led. And by the way, let's make sure that we understand something. Leadership is not a position. Leadership is a circumstantial thing. So it's in the presence of uncertainty of a particular kind, of this objective radical uncertainty, that leaders emerge. And often leaders emerge. So it's not that you can study to be a leader kind of thing. Leadership is a fundamental quality of a manager, of at least a general manager, not necessarily of a functional manager. And that's actually why general managers exist. They exist to cope with uncertainty and therefore relieve functional managers and their teams from this, at least some layers of uncertainty, and cope with them. So reflect on why do you follow someone? And if you reflect, well, yes, perhaps you follow people because they inspire you, fine. Perhaps you can follow people because they motivate you, fine. Then you can ask yourselves, why I was not motivated myself intrinsically? Why? And it's interesting to ask these questions. And so the best I can do now is to say, try to understand why you follow others. Second, do study a little bit about complexity theory. Start with Wikipedia or start with some other source and study a little bit about complexity. It's actually quite interesting, but think complexity is not a solution. By studying complexity, you're not going to find a solution to the things we've discussed. Complexity is a method to see the world, or rather to perceive the world. And so if you equip yourself with that method, and when you see the world, you see always the whole and the parts, and you see how the parts shape the whole, and how the whole shapes the parts all the time, you do it, you'll get there. Then you can, because then you see this interaction over time. And when you see this interaction over time, when you can see, when I use see, of course, I'm using see in a quite general point of view. When you perceive how time unfolds and how time kind of solves uncertainty, then you're ready to lead. But remember, imagining the future means that you can imagine things that are not counter what we already know about the world. So there is always a level of knowledge that you have to attain first. And I am so glad that the knowledge that people can attain today by attending conferences or following things that are published on the internet for all, or going to a school, or following programs, or using advisors or consultants as teachers, in a way, there's so much more now than 40 or 50 years ago. So we actually need to be quite thankful, quite grateful to all those, including engineers, that have started this field that we now call management, and in particular management of companies that are for profit or not for profit, of any size, of any kind. I think that we need to be very, very aware of what is already known. And when we at least grasp what is known, then we can imagine much better, and not just be crazy, because being crazy doesn't really help.
Or worse, not to think we're imagining something that's already been imagined. That's what I see more often than not. People thinking that they just came up with something radical, but it's been there for 100 years.
By the way, it's interesting that you and I come from polychronic cultures, and therefore we even didn't notice that 1 hour has already passed, but who cares? What is time? Time is just fun. But anyway, not to extend too much our time together in this conversation, it's very important that we understand that there is a realm of things that can be known and that we need to know, including about management, about business, about economics, and so forth. Yes, absolutely important to know that. But it's also very, very important to know that we have to be able to observe what's going on. We need to be able to study history so that we understand how in the past people like us coped with uncertainty, and how did they shape the world. And this is easy now, relatively easy. That's the beauty of this digital in age, and this ability to listen to see, to study, that was so hard and so limited in the past, in my time, for example. Let's put it this way. So this curiosity, which is another absolute fundamental piece of being a leader, this curiosity about what is known and making sure that you're not making mistakes that others have made in the same context that you're making them. So it's really not a good idea to imagine things that have been imagined and have shown to not work. That is also part of, but again, the world today is a world where not only can we have information and ideas from everywhere instantaneously, and that's the most important feature of our world today. So globalization today, the world is global, not because there's a lot of trade of goods and services and capital flowing between countries. No. That was the view we had in the 80s. We, meaning we, my generation. The interesting feature about the world today is that what flows around the world almost instantaneously, i.e. almost without time, is information, is ideas. And so the ability to use that information, those ideas that have been codified, articulated by others, and using all this as a source for our imagination, is, I think, key to this thing we're looking for. How to better understand emergence, how to better understand that improvisation is a key often to finding the future. That sometimes bricolage is also another way to find the future. So that there are many ways to find the future. And of course, when we lead a company, often with resources that are not ours, that others have, in a way, given us for us to take care of, we need to be very, very careful that it is not us. We are not the center of the world as executives or leaders or directors. It is the company that we serve, not investors. The company that we serve that needs to be the center of our world.
We are caretakers of our company.
Exactly. And if we do that well, it will be great for investors. It will be great for society.
It will be great for everybody, hopefully.
Let's not forget that. It is our goal as executives, as managers, as leaders, when we act as leaders in the face of uncertainty, to take care of the company. And if possible, to take the company into a different state of delivering that is somehow superior to the one that existed before. And in particular, try in a world like today to shape the future. Sure, many people will need to adapt to the present or to the past, but try to shape the future. Use all your energies to shape the future. Use your imagination to shape the future. Use as much knowledge as you can grab to shape a future, not to adapt to the past. Because the future will be different from the past. About that, we should have no doubt. In particular, in a post-radical crisis world, which is the world we live today, after the pandemic, And I wonder if in the future, historians will explain many of the things that are happening today, even wars, because the pandemic existed, because we were divided, because we were secluded, because we couldn't interact as humans, because it is wonderful to interact with you via this technology, wonderful. And with, I mean, a little bit with those that will, that are seeing us and listening to us and may do so in the future because they can send emails, they can send messages. So yes, but that is not human. What is human is to be face to face, is to share the same context, is to cope with the same uncertainty. And that is actually what makes us human. But believe you me, I'm a great admirer of all those that have developed this wonderful technology that I was fortunate to start using many decades ago, when computers came into kind of reality of companies and universities and so forth. So it's wonderful to use digital technology, but let's not forget that we are human when we are together. Together. Like this, we are together alone, right? I'm actually alone, you're alone, but we are together. But human is together. So let's not forget that, because local will always be the way we face the future. Always.
There's yeah, I really couldn't agree more. If anybody wants to read about why we behave this way, there's a great book called The 10 Types of Human. Obviously, it's not an astrology book, but it's about the behaviors that are ingrained in us and how our brain is actually structured to over-interpret geographically close information, local information. Thank you so much for that. I think there are 200 lessons to extract from our conversation today.
Not too many.
Well, I mean, I'm already thinking, I can't wait to re-listen to this weekend so that I can experience it again. And learn again. I think it feels like one of those conversations where I will learn something new every time I listen to it. And I'm sure that's true for our audience as well. And with that, Joe, I want to take us to, we always have a bit of a rapid fire round at the end, just 3 short questions that you can answer without even thinking about. And the first one maybe is just, is there a book that you recommend, be it on complexity or any of the topics that we've discussed until now, or if not a book, maybe a specific author or thinker that you think people listening to us today should really, have a look at?
Well, 2 authors. I'm not so quickly, I cannot give you one.
That is true.
I think that Mintzberg work is very interesting. And also Henry Mintzberg and Brian Arthur from the Santa Fe Institute. So, and if you go into and search around these 2 names, you will find other names and other works that can be quite useful. And so these are just 2 authors that I think, one is on the field of management, the other one is on the field of complexity theory, and they could be good people to enter through.
Yes, I was going to say, then you can pull the thread, right? Because they will reference other work. You can go to ChatGPT or Bard and just ask them, like, if I'm interested in this, what's like the rest of the web around them look like, and you can explore further. Just a door to enter the world is great. Okay, 2 more questions. Great strategy is ...
Well, I gave you the answer. Great strategy is to change the world.
Yes, I thought that was absolutely beautiful. And I'm now thinking, how are you changing the world, Marilyn? And the last one is, and maybe you've already answered this and you just want to recap it, but what is the one leadership quality that you think is most needed?
Well, again, I think I've replied already, so I'm not able to give you more.
Surely you've already given us the answer.
Well, it's this ability to cope with uncertainty, to absorb uncertainty. I think that is the defining quality of a leader. And at least when I think of why I was led, and I freely chose to be led, let's not forget that. We freely choose most of the time. We can. So we at least are fortunate to be able to do so. I chose to follow certain people. And when I reflect on why did I, is because when I was led by them, I could do my thing. And I could work with my team without having to worry will there be bread tomorrow? Because when you have to worry, will there be bread tomorrow? You're not doing your thing anymore.
I've felt that many times in my life, both the presence of a leader and the absence of one. And when you say that, I have many key moments of my professional career that appear, including moments where I wasn't a great leader because I put myself in a place where I wasn't coping with uncertainty in the right way.
But let me, there's something you should not be. So leadership is not about enchanting others. So it's not about tricking others.
No, for
not
sure
about
not.
making them believe that something that is impossible can be done. That's a different thing. So again, you need to use your imagination on the base of very solid understanding and knowledge of what is already known. So let's make sure that this is clear. Otherwise, there could be some...
Essentially in like layman terms, don't be a psychopath.
Well, if I knew psychology, I could say that, but I don't. So,
well, thank you so much for that, Joe. As always, I'm so grateful for our time here today and also for the many hours of preparation that we put into having this discussion together, and for your always willingness to come on board and help us think through complex things. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.
And that's a wrap for our 2023 Cosmic Conference. Thanks to everybody who attended. There's a few comments. Thank you for all the love you showed us during this discussion. All of our speakers who came before as well for sharing their knowledge and their wisdom with us. And last time, thank you to the Centaurs for making all of this happen. If you missed any of the sessions, you want to rewatch them, the conference might be over, but the content lives on forever. You can find it on our website, on YouTube, and as always, subscribe to our newsletter because we're about to enter the end of the year and help you make it count. So you can rely on us for more content and great insights in the weeks to come. Until then, thank you all and goodbye.